Alright, and we are back, ladies and gentlemen, with a little bit more of that Undertale goodness before the game finally ends. And if you're wondering what's happening right now, because I kind of left the last episode on a bit of a cliffhanger, suddenly this Eldritch Abomination, like that one character that showed up at the start of the game, suddenly became relevant again, and now it's a television. I don't know what I was expecting in terms of a final boss for this game, but this is just one of the few outcomes that you get, depending on what kind of pathway you choose. And, it's not quite what I expected. I will give it that. It certainly caught me off guard. You can sometimes see what appears to be the developer's face flashing in and out of the television screen, so props to him for making an appearance in his own game. I'm honestly not even sure who that's supposed to be. But the whole point of this fight is that it gives off this impression that you're not supposed to win. Like, if you're wondering what happened the previous episode, the whole game just crashed. And that's intentional. Pretty much any time you die in this next fight, your game will crash, and I think that's honestly an incredibly stupid mechanic. And I know what people are going to respond with, oh, it's supposed to be that way. I don't care. I still think that's an incredibly stupid mechanic. But the way this fight functions is that once you get past the first hurdle, it really isn't too bad. Like, obviously the attacks are very difficult to avoid, but the lower your health becomes, the less damage is inflicted upon you. So it kind of gives off this impression that you're always meant to win, but there's still the very slight threat that you're going to lose, so you'll have to stay on the move constantly. This fight is pretty difficult at the very beginning, but the way it functions afterwards is that you're given these little prompts where you're supposed to avoid a very specific attack. For example, right here, I'm being attacked by magic hands, and at some point there's going to be a little act button that appears, and once you call for help, then suddenly all of the attacks turn green, and green is very good. Eat your vegetables, after all. Once you collect all of those green things, you restore all of your health, and the battle basically continues this way for a while, before the game finally decides, alright, you've endured enough time, now we're just gonna kill the final boss. And yeah, I got nothing on this. Like, I can't say I'm really disturbed by the appearance of this, it's just odd. I like the design, I think it's a pretty interesting design, but definitely not what I expected. Here we go with the next attack, and really, I could be commentating over how absurd this looks. Like, suddenly we're being attacked by Ballerinas, I presume. But instead, I think I'm just going to devote the rest of this video to maybe just talk a bit about how I truly feel about this game. Because, the whole reason I'm doing this in post-commentary to begin with is because my live commentary was a little bit half-assed. In fact, the editing of the previous video was rather blatantly half-assed, just because I was getting sick of dealing with audio issues. I now actually have a bit of a makeshift pop filter I'm working with on my microphone right now, and so far it seems to have performed pretty decently, so hopefully there will be less in the way of sudden very loud audio bumps and things like that in the background, which just really began to piss me off when I was going through and trying to splice all the audio up once again. I had to edit some dialogue out previously, and I really don't want to have to deal with that. Anyway, let's switch gears here and talk how I actually feel about the game as a whole. Undertale, we're gonna start off with the gameplay. It's very shoot-'em-up-esque, as you could plainly see. It involves quite a lot of dodging attacks, and I do appreciate it when they spice things up with fights such as against the game show host Metaton, where it involves actually piloting a little astro fighter, I suppose. Your heart becomes an astro fighter. I thought that was a neat little mechanic. Overall, you're taking a basic role of a shoot-'em-up style and changing things up a little bit so that way you're dodging many different kinds of attacks. It gets a little bit hectic a lot of the time. So this game is kind of all over the place in terms of difficulty. It starts out being pretty basic, but then they expect you to do some pretty ridiculous shenanigans in order to actually survive. It gets quite frantic. But overall, I'd say that this is a game that you could pretty much easily adjust to, and I guess it really just depends on the path that you choose, where the difficulty really suddenly gets this dramatic spike. And in the case with me, where I did have to kill one boss, that certainly gave me a bit of an easier time for later sections of the game, but the problem is, it has to do with the story, really, where the developer really doesn't want you to kill anyone if you want the best outcome. So, pretty much what happened after I completed the game, I got one of the neutral endings. I think there's many different kinds of neutral endings you can acquire, depending on the choices you've made throughout the story. But they really want you to try and spare as many people as possible. Now, there is the other polar opposite of that, where you're just essentially... Really, the choices you get in this story are you're either Mother Teresa or you're a baby eater, and if it boils down to as broad a choice of that, yeah, I'd probably have to go with the former, because even with the neutral endings, they're really not all that fulfilling you're going to see. It's pretty much a credit scroll. You get a phone call from the DeVito brothers who let you know, hey, this is how things are going on back in our world. Just thought we'd drop in and leave you a line. And then that's it, that's the end of the game. So what happened after I completed the game is I went ahead and spoiled myself the other endings. And I think I finally understand why people like this game a lot. And this is just a theory. This could be just one of the many reasons behind why people are very attracted to Undertale. But the ultimate reason I have probably has to do with, well, the characters. And we're gonna get a bit into that because the characters, I really couldn't care for many of them. I mean, I guess the Tammys were pretty adorable, and I did enjoy Metaton, but as a whole, I really found a lot of them were sort of one note. And I really didn't think too much about a lot of the ones that I've encountered, such as the Revenant, and, well, I guess Undyne, Fish Lady. That was kind of a thing I really didn't like all that much, is that I just really couldn't care for many of them. They all seemed to have like one or two personality quirks, and that was about it. But the thing is, when you play the game the way the developer intends you to play, where you try and spare as many people as possible, in fact all people, all monsters, then you get a sense of world building. You get to know those people a little more intimately, and I think that's a good thing, I suppose, but at the same time, it really doesn't give doing any of the other runs a proper purpose. I understand, I did watch a review from one of my favorite video game reviewers about this game, and the outcomes that you get from doing a full genocide run is just incredibly boring. You basically become overpowered, and I think there's maybe one or two incredibly difficult fights beyond that point, but as it stands, it's really not worth doing. Undertale is a game that prioritizes its world building, and your child is basically going to be the representation of you. Now, the whole silent protagonist narrative, I'm not personally a fan of it unless they could somehow make the silent protagonist interesting by the actions that he or she takes, but this character is just a blank, expressionless piece of cardboard. It doesn't do anything, and I'm not going to say that this is necessarily a bad thing, it's just my personal preference when it comes to picking a protagonist for a video game. For example, one of the things I kind of liked about Super Mario RPG, the only other RPG I really dedicated myself to playing, was that Mario, despite the fact that he never speaks, he has emotion. His actions really define who his character is, and that makes him mildly entertaining in those moments where you aren't just beating up the bad guys. And in the case of this, I would have liked it if Undertale didn't have such a serious story. Like, it's very quirky and lighthearted in some areas, but there's this whole meta-commentary behind it about how your actions can permanently damage certain aspects of the game. Especially in the case of killing certain characters, like the fish lady I killed earlier actually has like a whole character arc behind herself that you can explore if you take a full pacifist run, and yeah, I just... One of the things I really wish that the developer did was kind of take the quirkiness of the characters that surround you and take it to its full extent, rather than building upon this incredibly dramatic and serious story behind everything. Again, I'm not going to say that Undertale has a bad story, but I kind of wish that they embraced more of its quirky nature as a whole. Because that's just the impression I got from the whole game. But in the end, the endings as well, like, if you get a genocidal ending, it's just incredibly dark. If you get the good ending, like the actual true ending, it's disgustingly saccharine. And if you get a neutral ending, well, the game essentially says, try it again, but this time, do things a little bit differently towards the end. And I've got nothing else at this point, so as a whole, how would I recommend Undertale to anyone? I think it's a game that's worth experiencing. I think everyone should at least give it a little bit of a chance, even if you're just, like, not really interested at all. I don't know, I wouldn't personally force anyone to play the game, but I would give it my highest recommendation, even just from a storytelling perspective, just to see if you get a sense of enjoyment out of seeing how the characters interact with, well, you, because I guess you represent the character. I did initially say I didn't intend to give it a second playthrough, but even after I've spoiled myself what the other outcomes are, I may give it one proper playthrough to do a full pacifist run, just to say that I did it. Just to sort of get that closure that I feel I needed after the rather underwhelming events that occurred during this ending. And, well, yeah, it's about $10 on Steam. Congratulations to the developer for creating one of the worst fan bases on the internet, but ultimately also creating a pretty good game overall. It's just, I think there are some things that could have been done a whole lot better, and from a gameplay perspective, I don't fully appreciate it. From a storytelling perspective, I suppose it's alright. I'm just gonna give it the alright seal of approval, and I think this is gonna be the part where I just stop commentating and let the remainder of the video finish. So, thank you all very much for watching. Thank you once again, MageBones, for gifting me with this game. And yeah, I guess I will see you in the next playthrough, which is probably going to be a walkthrough actually, so I'd better go get to work on that. Anyway, bye bye.